Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Gallagher Wealth Management YouTube channel quarterly market update. You know, we did a live version of this update, I guess it was 3 or 4 Thursdays ago, and we're about a month and a week or two away from beginning the third quarter. So I figured it would be an appropriate time to record something and kind of tell you where we are at this point. And this will be a little bit of a recap of what we did just a few weeks ago on the live call. So if you were part of that, you've heard most of this, but I might add a few new wrinkles into it right now. So stay tuned, don't stop viewing right now. Listen to the extra that I put into this. Well, I want to cover 3 things right now. First of all is, what have we seen happening already through the first quarter and the first half of the second quarter this year? And the answer is, generally speaking, when it comes to the stock market, we have seen the stock market trending higher. Now, it doesn't feel that way if you listen to the news. If your only engagement in the market or in your accounts is by listening to the news every now and then, it doesn't feel like the market is trending higher. In fact, one of our clients said something to me very profound a few weeks ago when he said to me, after I asked him the question, "How often do you look at your accounts?" His answer was, "Never." And I said, "Okay, well, walk me through that. Why never?" And he said, "Well, Kevin, because every time I hear about the markets, it ain't good." That's literally what he said. He said, "Every time I hear about the markets, it ain't good." Well, during the course of our conversation, I didn't think anything special of that phrase. But later on that night, I thought about it. And you know what? He's right. Every time you hear about the market, it ain't good, because that's all they report on the regular news. You know, it catches the headlines when the Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 700 points in a day. But they don't tell you that it may have been creeping higher by 1,000 points in the previous 2 weeks. And that's just an example, but you get my point. It is largely true that if your only engagement with the markets is listening to the news, then generally speaking, your opinion of the market is going to be negative, because every time you hear about it, it's the negative side of the story. Well, the truth is that pretty much since November of last year, the market has been trending higher. And don't forget this, as markets trend higher, sell-offs, days or weeks where the market goes down, are part of a market that is going higher. Sell-offs are part of the process. So don't be afraid of them. They're gonna happen. You're going to wake up and hear that on the news, even as the market is trending higher. You know, the reverse is true when markets are trending lower. There are still days in a downward moving market where the market has a pretty good day or a pretty good week, but it doesn't break the trend of what way the market is actually going. So right now we see a pretty good upward trend right now. Will that continue on through the year? Well, we'll see. History is certainly on our side, but we'll see. But right now, the market looks pretty doggone healthy. So that's what we're seeing right now. We feel pretty good about the markets right now. Well, what else has been going on? Well, in the economic front, if you weren't paying attention, did you know, while we were all still very concerned about inflation and interest rates, we're all still very concerned about that. It's very much in the news, but did you know that we have had 6 straight consecutive months where the CPI data, the measurement of inflation, if you will, 6 straight months in a row where that data is declining each and every month? Again, if you just listen to the news, it doesn't feel that way. But that is indeed what is happening. So we're starting to hear really, really good information on the inflation front, which is exactly what I told all of you many months ago when the Fed started raising rates. All we did is looked back on history and we said, you know what? Inflation tends to start to come down after about the 6th or 7th rate hike of the Fed. Historically, that's how it happens. In fact, it's happened 4 times in a row where the Fed's raising interest rates for the purpose of knocking down inflation, and inflation doesn't start to come down until the 5th, 6th, or 7th rate hike. Well, guess what? That's exactly what happened this time. And since that first decrease in CPI, we've had 5 more in a row. So the Fed is doing its job. The other thing that we heard that was pretty positive from the Fed was that they are going to start being a little more data dependent. You know, prior to this moment right now, they just said, oh my gosh, the building is on fire. In other words, inflation is out of control. We just need to come into that fire and hose it down. Just spray as much water on it as possible. Well, the analogy is that's raising interest rates. So they did. They came in and just started raising interest rates fast and furious. That's probably a good job. And now they're saying, hey, we think we're getting it under control. So we're not just going to keep pushing rate hikes through. We're going to pause now and analyze the situation. Be a little more thoughtful, and we might pause even raising hikes. We're not sure yet. But at least they're starting to use that language. And that's the first time that we've heard that language in about a year. So that's incredibly encouraging as well. Well, maybe that's why we're seeing the market trend a little bit higher for those 2 reasons right there. Now, what else have we seen, though? Well, if you were paying attention to the news, we heard that there's a banking crisis. We saw some very high-profile names, some banks, go out of business. Silicon Valley Bank. Did I say that was high-profile? Raise your hand if you had ever heard of Silicon Valley Bank before they announced it on TV. Folks, it's not the largest bank in the world. And it's a bank that specializes in loans and deposits from very specific types of people out in California and venture capital funds and things of that nature. So its business is a lot different than your local bank. My local bank here is Sandy Spring Bank in Montgomery County, Maryland. Silicon Valley Bank is a lot different than that. We also saw Signature Bank go under. We also saw Credit Suisse go under. But the Fed has stepped in and definitively said, there's no banking crisis. That is a quote. You can go onto the Fed's website. Yet the news media keeps saying banking crisis. And the Fed keeps saying no banking crisis. Guess what? I'm going to go with the Fed's terminology more than the news. Listen, I'm certainly not a bank analyst, but I read an awful lot of very detailed reports on what happened to those banks. And every single thing that I read, from Bloomberg to Barron's, all pointed the finger very squarely at those banks, saying, hey, it wasn't necessarily a bank failure as much as it was the failure of those who were in charge of the risk controls of that bank, sort of asleep at the wheel. The other thing that kind of tells you that maybe this phraseology of bank crisis is a little overdone is just pay attention to what else you see. With every one of these banks, bar none, there's no exception here, every one of these banks that has gone under, a much larger bank has come in and bought that bank up very quickly. A perfect example of that is JP Morgan stepping in to buy Signature Bank immediately. I don't think JP Morgan bought Signature Bank if they thought that it was a bank on fire going under. They recognized it's probably a pretty good bank, it's probably just lousy people running it. So that's kind of what we're seeing right now. We're seeing a market trend higher. We're seeing really good news on the inflation front. We're seeing really good news and terminologies from the Fed saying, hey, we might be a little more data dependent now before we just raise rates. And we're also seeing the Fed really push back on this media phenomenon, if you will, of a banking crisis. Are there banks out there that are mismanaging their risk portfolios right now? Yeah, probably. But because we've already seen a couple go under, you can bet that the Fed is really pushing hard on local and regional banks now to make sure they've got their balance sheets cleaned up. So I don't know if we'll see much more of that in the future. And I'm just, again, you can go right to the Fed's website, and the language that I'm using right now is right on there. So, you know, the banking crisis thing, I think, was a little overplayed. So what else are we seeing? Well, let's talk about what we're doing in your portfolios. Because of some of the things that I just said to you, when we look at our partnership, our third-party money managers, groups that many of you have, Russell Investments, Clark Capital, I call them CCMG, Progressive Asset Management, some of the CAMS models, some of the Calvert models, many of you have all of those in your portfolios. Well, what am I doing with them? Well, my job is to connect with them to make sure that they're making the right changes, the right allocations within the environment that we're in. And so far, many of you have seen the following kind of general trend in your portfolios, and that is on the stock side of your portfolios, you are definitely seeing over the last 4 or 5 months, we're moving away from large cap, large company exposure and more into middle cap and small cap, mid cap, small cap company exposure. That's ubiquitous across all of our portfolios right now. Most of the managers are doing that. It makes a lot of sense in the environment that we're in. On the bond side of the house, we're moving a little bit out into further maturities. In the last year or so, we've brought our maturities much further in. Russell has done that a lot. Progressive Asset Management has done that a lot. But we're now seeing them push out a little further into longer maturities. Why? Because the belief is that the interest rate environment is starting to stabilize. Why? Number one, we can see it, and number two, the Fed is telling us that. So that's kind of what's going on right now. That's where we are right now. We're in the middle of May. We're feeling pretty comfortable with what we're doing. We think we have a handle on it. But of course, if you have any questions about your personal investments, or if anything has changed on your end, please get a hold of us. But also make sure you watch these videos, because these videos are important for me to reach out to all of you and tell you what's going on, tell you what we're seeing, what we're thinking, and what we're doing. And if I had my money with someone else, well, I have it with me, so that's kind of someone else. If I had my money with someone, I would want to know what they're seeing, what they're thinking, and what we're doing. And that's why we do this for you. We want you to be engaged. As you've all heard me say before, it's your money, not ours. But it is our responsibility to report back to you what we're doing on your behalf and how it's working. Hey, with that, thank you if you joined us for our live presentation. There will be another one coming up in the first month of next quarter. We do those in the first month of every quarter. And then usually a couple weeks after that, we do a video version of it. So if you can only catch the video versions, that's great. If you're going to be there for the live one, I'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks so much. Stay well.